to look at the approaches that are being taken by NHS boards in Scotland, to look at how we could improve on the way in which these services are provided, and to look at the most up-to-date evidence on the provision of IVF treatment. We expect to receive that group's report early next year, which will then inform how we move forward in the NHS in Scotland on the provision of NHS IVF treatment. Of course, that will also look at the issue of age range, giving the most up-to-date evidence we have in this matter, and no doubt the expert group will make their recommendations to ministers, and we will then consider how we progress that within NHS in Scotland.
That ends general question time. We now move on to First Minister's questions. Question number 1, Joanne Lamont.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I welcome the First Minister back to his place to ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Well, thank you for that welcome. Later today I am meeting Fergus Ewing, Derek Mackay to discuss arrangements for Mandela Day, the annual celebration of the work and legacy of Nelson Mandela, which is held on his birthday on July the 18th. Events in Scotland are coordinated by Action for Southern Africa Scotland, the successor to the anti-apartheid movement. I am sure the whole Chamber will be delighted to know that we have just received a message from Archbishop Desmond Tutu, which says, quote, "I am aware that Scotland has set world-leading targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and is working closely with Mary Robinson to champion climate justice. These initiatives are very much in the spirit of Mandela Day, and I am delighted that the strong links between the people of South Africa and the people of Scotland endure. The more people who mark and enjoy Mandela Day, the better."
Joanne Lamont.
And can I, of course, wish the First Minister well with his plans for a man who is an inspiration to all of us who believe in equality and justice across the world. In the last few years, the First Minister has befriended Fred Goodwin, Rupert Murdoch and David Murray. Since then, a bank has gone down, a paper has folded and a football club has closed. In that context, was the First Minister's decision not to meet the Dalai Lama an act of mercy?
First Minister. Order. First Minister.
The presentation of the meeting with the Dalai Lama was as a pastoral religious visit. That's how it was greeted. The presiding officer convened, as I understand it, a meeting in the Parliament to receive somebody with due respect. That's the right way for a religious leader to be greeted. That's a perfectly proper way for the Dalai Lama to be regarded. For the life of me, I cannot see why that should be a matter of political division. It's a matter of duly acknowledging respect for a religious leader.
Joanne Lamont.
Last week, the Deputy First Minister quoted Robin Cook. This week, can I paraphrase John Smith? Here is the First Minister with a non-Midas touch. He holds his party conference in Glasgow, and in the local elections, the city sends him homewards to think again. He went to the cinema to launch his independence campaign, and only yesterday announced there will be a remake. And did his... Yep. And did his pandas mate? No, they got the colic. How does the First Minister... How does the First Minister explain his sudden loss of form?
First Minister.
I'm willing to accept responsibility for many things, but for non-mating pandas, I think... I'm glad that Joanne Lamont is so pleased with yesterday, because yesterday, of course, we had an opinion poll showing the SNP government at 45%, and the Labour Party at 32%. Now, I was pleased enough with the figures,
Order, just
but I have
down.
to say, delighted with the Labour Party's reaction. A Labour spokesman reacted to a poll showing a 13% Labour lead with SNP lead by saying, "We are pleased." Well, Labour are pleased. I'm pleased with a 13% SNP. They were ending the session in total harmony We're all pleased.
Joanne Lamont.
I think that's just taking it too far.
Order.
I would hazard a guess that if the pandas had mated, the First Minister might have struggled to perhaps take credit for it. You know, I know the First Minister's pleased with himself. It's a defining characteristic of his nature. But sometimes I think the firebrand First Minister's gas is at peak. Let's look at his radical plans. We're keeping the Queen, keeping the pound, keeping London in charge of interest rates and banking regulation. We're keeping the Union Jack. And in an independent Scotland, we'll all be British. That's what his party members all really joined SNP for, to remain British. Isn't the real reason the First Minister is asking for a second question in his referendum is because he knows he's lost the first?
First Minister.
I now realise the fascination for pandas in the Labour Party, because Patricia Ferguson on the 11th of May reported that Labour Party submitted responses to the consultation on the referendum in the names of Mickey Mouse, Daffy Duck and Tin, the panda. Unfortunately, there was no official response from the Labour Party itself. Well, unless we want to select from the Labour ranks the three names that Patricia Ferguson noted. So given that the Labour Party didn't submit any response to the consultation, are they really in a position to say they've got a position on how the referendum should take place? In contrast to the Labour Party, a huge number of people from Civic Scotland have been submitting with the 21,000 people who responded to the consultation exercise. Pat Rafferty, the Unite Regional Secretary, last week, the survey already reflects what the Scottish people are saying. The majority want a second question. Henry McLeish, there are compelling reasons for a second question and a bigger choice for Scots. Martin Syme of the SCVO, there is a strong appetite for a second question. Graham Smith, the STUC General Secretary, it would be daft to rule out a multi-option referendum. Now, the Scottish Government set out in January our preferred question, one that Ruth Davidson was fine enough to say was legal and decisive, and she approved of at that stage. But people in Civic Scotland are entitled to submit their ideas to this consultation, and it ill behoves a party that couldn't even be bothered to submit a response to the consultation to criticise those who have.
Joanne Lamont. Order. Ms Lamont.
We recognise the First Minister has a mandate to ask the question whether Scotland wants to leave the United Kingdom. The people of Scotland have the right to answer that question. Secondly, the First Minister talks about people who want to ask a second question. His own Deputy First Minister said she wanted one question, and I suspect the people behind her think so too. Now, when the First Minister was a nationalist, my complaint was that he didn't focus on health and education, just obsessed about independence. He still doesn't focus on what really matters to people, and it now appears he doesn't even believe in independence anymore. Yesterday, he abandoned the economic case for independence, outsourced his campaign and declared that the real nationalist Margaret MacDonald was incompatible with it. Isn't it the case that this isn't about Scotland's future, but the country has been put on pause while he gropes for his place in history?
First Minister.
Well,
Order.
I'm a Scottish nationalist. I believe in independent Scotland, as does Margaret MacDonald. When did Joanne Lamont and the Labour Party last declared themselves to be socialists anymore. So, let's talk about the issues that matter to Scots, the issues that Joanne Lamont says that the government doesn't focus on, because we're seeing some vital statistics in the last few days. On the economy, Ernst & Young reporting that Scotland, yet again, is the top destination for inward investment. On crime, the lowest level of recorded crime since 1975. Satisfaction with the health service in Scotland in the social attitude survey at a record level since the onset of the Parliament. Education, 92% of secondary schools providing the 2 periods of physical education, up from 46%. Maybe that's why the social attitude survey told us that 71% of people trust this Scottish Government, compared to 18% trust the Westminster Government.
Question number 2. Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I'd also like to thank the First Minister for his letter apologising to me for saying in the Chamber last week that the Scottish Conservatives didn't respond to his consultation. I'm glad that he was able to put that record straight. I would also like to ask the First Minister when he will next meet the Prime Minister.
First Minister.
I willingly acknowledge I did correct the record. I'm sure the Chamber will pardon me. It's becoming increasingly different to remember what the Conservative Party is and what the Labour Party is. No plans, near future.
Ruth Davidson.
A month ago, the First Minister spared no expense shipping in Atlantic expats to add a touch of celebrity and glamour to the launch of his separation campaign. A launch the like of which we'd never seen before. In fact, it was remarkable in one completely undisputed way, and that was it is the first campaign launch in political history to produce a bounce for its opponents. But since last month, the Greens have taken their ball away, and we hear that a rapid relaunch was ordered from Nat's High Command, and that's what we've seen. We now know that Dennis Canavan is going to be the new chair of the Yes Scotland campaign. He's read out everyone else's name. Can the First Minister tell us what Mr Canavan's views are on the referendum question?
First Minister.
Mr Canavan is looking at the consultation and supports the right of the Scottish people to decide their own future in a referendum. I just wish the Tories had been consistent on that position. But in terms of bounces, there was no bounce for the Tory party. In terms, I thought they thought by association with Labour, a party at its lowest level since 1918, they might get an opinion poll bounce, but there we are at 12% in yesterday's poll. Not much sign of a bounce there. I am puzzled as to why the Conservatives believe that having a campaign headed up by a Chancellor who brought this great country to its knees. Hey. I'm quoting from Annabel Goldie in 2010. Is a particularly effective thing to do. I think most folk looking at the No campaign launch would probably agree with the words of Charlie Gordon. Remember him? Charlie Gordon, former leader of Glasgow Council, former Labour MSP, only halfway through the recession, jobless youngsters' benefits threatened, devolution can't protect them. Better together with the Tories? I think most Labour supporters in Scotland will agree with Charlie Gordon that the alliance between Labour and Tories will be the death knell for both parties in Scotland.
I know I'm relatively new at this, and I'm kind of getting used to all the assertion and bluster, but I'm pretty sure that the First Minister has no idea what Dennis Canavan's views are on a referendum question. So let me share those views with the Chamber, because the new chair of the Separatist campaign said in only April of this year that he supports a single question because otherwise, and I quote, "it is completely confusing to the electorate with all this Devo Plus and Devo Max." So, we have a chair of the Yes Scotland campaign in favour of a single question, We have the Better Together campaign in favour of a single question. Every major party in this Parliament is in favour of a single question. So, will the First Minister confirm today, ahead of whenever his next relaunch is, that his government and his party will actually back Dennis Canavan and support a single referendum question?
First Minister.
Well, as Ruth Davidson might remember, the government set out its preferred question in January. Do you agree that Scotland should be an independent country? That's our preferred question. And of course, that was voted on recently by this Parliament, and a majority of the Parliament agreed that Scotland should be an independent country. And Ruth Davidson responded to that in January by saying that was a reasonable, direct and proper question to ask. I suppose we should ask, is Ruth Davidson still of that opinion, or has she been instructed otherwise by her new partners in the campaign? We are launching and have a consultation exercise. 21,000 submissions to that consultation, or roughly 10 times the number who submitted to the UK consultation. One of the people who did submit, we now know, was Ruth Davidson on behalf of the Conservative Party, and I'm sure she wouldn't want a situation where we didn't consider very carefully what the Conservative Party had to say about this great question facing the Scottish people. But equally, doesn't she think we should look at what Civic Scotland, the SDUC and all the range of other opinions have to say? Because maybe the reason that the SNP are at 45% and the Tories are at 12% is the trust which is invested in this government is based on the fact that we listen to the people of Scotland and then take decisions, as opposed to listening to David Cameron and doing what we're told.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Earlier this month in Glasgow, the so-called Scottish Defence League sought to disrupt a peaceful demonstration by the campaign to welcome refugees. And following serious complaints, the Chief Constable of Strathclyde Police has agreed to an external investigation of allegations that officers were effectively perceived to be facilitating the SDL's activity. Does the First Minister acknowledge the threat posed to our society by the organised racist thugs of the SDL and similar organisations, and does he agree that in future it is unacceptable if any police officer is put in the position of being accused of facilitating the SDL in their obnoxious and disgusting activism?
First Minister.
But let me say that Patrick Harvie and I are at one in his description of the Scottish Defence League, as indeed I think people from across the Chamber are. The Chief Constable of Strathclyde should have great confidence in pursuing the investigations, and I'm sure that Patrick Harvie, in asking the question, was not suggesting in any way any lack of confidence in the police service in Scotland. That investigation will be pursued. It's one of the reasons why we have so much confidence in our police service, is we know that these things will be properly conducted. So that investigation will take place. The results will no doubt inform lessons for the future. But this Chamber is united against the activities of the Scottish Defence League.
Gibson.
So we are aware of the recent announcement that may result in 50 job losses at the DSM Nutritional Products Manufacturing Facility in Dalry, in my constituency, where 370 people are currently employed, and which is the only site in the world outside China that manufactures vitamin C. Can I ask the First Minister what discussions the Scottish Government has had with DSM about potential job losses, and what action the Scottish Government will take to ensure that the consequences of any job losses are mitigated to the greatest extent possible?
First Minister.
Well, my officials at Scottish Development International and Scottish Enterprise are already working with DSM management in Dalry to strengthen the skills of the employees by investing in workforce development projects and providing grant funding to improve the manufacturing processes at Dalry. This should help to safeguard the Dalry site. Scottish Enterprise will encourage the company to minimise the number of potential redundancies. Should the job losses go ahead, of course, we will ensure the support and advice is given to all of those through the Partnership for Action for Continuing Employment, the PACE programme. It should be said, as Kenny Gibson will know, that there have been some huge successes in the life science sector recently in Scotland, not least of which in his constituency, but we will do everything possible to minimise the impact of potential job losses at DSM.
Neil Findlay.
There's real anger in West Lothian today at the news that the children's ward at St John's Hospital is to close for 3 weeks in July due to a lack of junior doctors. Will the First Minister personally intervene so we can get this appalling situation resolved? And will he agree to meet with me and representatives from West Lothian on this vitally important matter?
First Minister.
Well, I'm sure the Health Secretary will be happy to conduct such a meeting. It should be said, this is a clear and unsatisfactory situation that the member raises. It's to do with the difficulties in recruitment of paediatric staff. That recruitment process is underway, and also a new training exercise is underway. And these actions are designed to ensure that we can avoid such things in St John's Hospital in the future. And I'm sure in the meeting with the Health Secretary we'll be able to reassure Neil Findlay, and indeed those he brings along from West Lothian, that these actions are well and truly underway.
Question number 3, Joe Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what impact the Scottish Government considers further reductions in the UK welfare budget will have on poverty in Scotland.
First Minister.
Well, the Department for Work and Pensions estimate that the reforms that have been made by the UK coalition government will reduce benefit receipts in Scotland by some £2.5 billion by 2015. Projections made by the Institute of Fiscal Studies in last October suggest that by 2020 child poverty in Scotland as a result could rise by more than 50,000 and working age poverty by over 160,000 if you directly extrapolate the impact of current UK government policy.
Joe Fitzpatrick.
These figures are extremely worrying indeed. This Parliament can be rightly proud of the progress we've made on a range of social issues, such as the latest homeless figures showing levels have dropped by around a fifth in the past year, and local authorities set to reach their target to reach the 2012 commitment. However, this progress is threatened by the UK Prime Minister's attempts to portray thousands of low-pay workers and out-of-work youngsters as scroungers who do not deserve the safety net of housing benefit. Can I ask the First Minister what we can do to protect Scots from these ill-thought-out and damaging proposals, which I'm sure my colleagues on the Labour benches would agree would never have been proposed by any past, present or future Scottish Government?
First Minister.
I think Joe Fitzpatrick puts it very well. There is a general agreement to the proposition that work should pay. I think that's shared across the parties. But there is also a general revulsion in Scotland to attacks on people with disabilities and attacks on young people just because they're young people. And this Chamber, united substantially at least, to do what it could to mitigate the impact of some of the worst of the welfare cuts that are taking place. I would say in the long term, perhaps the best answer is to vote yes in the referendum.
Question number 4, Roderick Campbell.
I ask the First Minister what issues were discussed at the most recent meeting of the British-Irish Council.
First Minister.
Well, as Roderick Campbell will be aware, I chaired the 18th summit of the British-Irish Council hosted by the Scottish Government in Stirling last Friday, which discussed a range of topics, but in particular ways to encourage increased youth employment across these islands and support for the marine energy sector. All member nations of the Council agreed that we should continue to work closely together on these important issues, and that the work of the British-Irish Council after the establishment of the Permanent Secretariat here in Edinburgh is moving up a gear and is an extremely useful body.
Rod Campbell.
I thank the First Minister for his answer. The First Minister has already referred to the findings of the latest social attitude survey that showed that 71% of people trust the Scottish Government to act in Scotland's best interest, compared to 18% who trust the UK Government. The same survey also showed that 73% say the Scottish Government ought to have the most influence over how Scotland is run. In the light of this survey, what advice will the First Minister be giving to the Prime Minister at the next meeting of the British-Irish Council?
First Minister.
Let my people go.
Question number 5, Sarah Boyack. Sarah Boyack. Order.
To ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government will instigate a public inquiry into the outbreak of Legionella in Edinburgh.
First Minister.
Well, can I thank Sarah Boyack for raising this issue. I'm sure the whole Chamber will wish to join me in thanking the staff of NHS Lothian for their effective response to the Legionella's outbreak. Our condolences are with the families of those who have sadly lost their lives to this disease. The Health and Safety Executive of the City of Edinburgh Council are continuing their regulatory investigations into the source of the outbreak. Lothian and Borders Police and the Health and Safety Executive are jointly investigating the circumstances of the 2 deaths under the direction of the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service. And I'm sure Sarah Boyack knows, as a former Minister herself, that the time to consider what steps to take in terms of inquiries will be after the criminal investigations are completed.
Sarah Boyack.
Indeed, First Minister, and evidence to the Health Committee this week left many questions unanswered, but it was suggested there might be technical changes in relation to cooling towers which could reduce the possibility of future outbreaks. What will the First Minister do to ensure we get a proper inquiry so that lessons will be learned swiftly and action taken to protect public health? Firefighter Ewan Williamson died on the 12th of July in Dalry nearly 3 years ago, and his family and fellow firefighters are still waiting for vital questions to be answered. So can the First Minister promise that local communities will not have to wait that long this time, and that we will get a proper inquiry and answers to the questions that are concerning the whole community?
Well,
First Minister.
Boyack will also know that the Health and Safety Executive is a reserve function. Now, we're working extremely closely, as is Lothian Health Board, with the Health and Safety Executive, but they have to be allowed to apply their investigation in the timescale that they are moving forward with. And she must appreciate that when potentially criminal matters are involved, the timing of criminal inquiries takes precedence over more general inquiries. But she can be absolutely certain that whatever needs to be done in terms of inquiring into this most serious outbreak, and thankfully I can report that there's been no new cases in the last couple of days, but this is an immensely serious outbreak which has resulted in human tragedy, and no stone will be left unturned into inquiring in any lessons once that timescale of criminal investigation has been met.
Question number 6, Jamie McGrigor.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's position is on charging shoppers 5p per plastic carrier bag.
First Minister.
Well, as Jimmy McGregor knows, we are consulting on a proposal. Jamie McGregor knows. We are consulting on a proposal to require retailers to charge for all single-use carrier bags to encourage reuse, cutting a very visible form of litter and its impact on wildlife and local economies. Any proceeds, of course, are being directed to go to charity. This is part of the Safeguarding Scotland's Resources programme launched yesterday by Richard Lochhead to consult on a programme for measures on the effective use of materials. As the member will be aware, there is a big focus on helping businesses to innovate and to cut costs. It could help them save up to £1.4 billion per year by using raw materials more efficiently and cutting waste effectively.
Jamie McGrigor.
Thank you. Well, while we all agree with the aim of reducing the use of plastic, does the First Minister agree with me that efforts should be focused on carrot rather than stick, on incentives rather than just imposing yet another tax on hard-pressed Scottish consumers? What is his response to the concerns of the Scottish Retail Consortium, whose director has stated that an obsession with carrier bags, which account for a fraction of 1% of household waste, mustn't get in the way of the much more significant goals such as reducing the carbon footprint of thousands of everyday products? But if the First Minister's government does go ahead with this punitive tax on Scottish people, will the funds raised be used to fund tackling the spread of litter, which he's mentioned, which is the real cause of the problem, and also to encourage the use of reusable bags, such as this lovely ladybird bag, which I brought into the chamber to show him?
I think the member knows I don't like props, and I certainly don't like advertising either. First Minister.
Well, I have to say, that was slightly more effective when you mentioned it on the radio programme I heard you the other day. I'm sure there's no promotion involved in Jamie McGregor's demonstration. But I was rather, listening to that programme, I was rather puzzled by one reference that Jamie McGregor made. He said that Scotland was too wet to introduce this policy. I was kind of disappointed in that, because I know that, as he knows, that this policy has been successfully introduced in Wales. So I looked at the average rainfall in Aberdeen and Glasgow, and I'm delighted to report it is less than it is in Cardiff. So if it's too wet in Scotland, then presumably it must be too wet in Cardiff, which leaves Jamie McGregor to explain why the policy has been so successful in Wales in recent times. Finally, can I also say that we are not the only people considering such a measure, not just in Wales, but I understand our friends in the South are also considering such a measure. It was reported in The Independent on Sunday, just last Sunday, the 24th of June, that the Chancellor of the Exchequer had defied the Prime Minister over introduction of a similar bag tax. So I'm sure Jamie McGregor is pleased to know that not only is he questioning me, but he's defying his own Prime Minister.
That ends First Minister's questions. A point of order from Mark MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yesterday, during the Stage 3 debate on police and fire reform, Jenny Mara challenged me to audit Scotland's 32 local authorities and stated that if I did so, I would find that the Labour Party had, quote,